Did you know that long before a single transatlantic slave ship ever crossed the ocean, Africans had already built homes, raised families, and shaped societies across the Middle East and Asia? Most of us grow up learning one version of the African diaspora, the story of the Middle Passage, of plantations in the Americas, of blues and jazz born from suffering. That story is real, it is powerful, but it is not the only story. There is another diaspora, much older and often forgotten. This is the story of Africans who crossed not the Atlantic but the Indian Ocean, who sailed not west but east, who became not African Americans or Afro-Caribbeans but Afro-Arabs, Afro-Iranics, Afro-Indics, and Afro-Turks. Their journey stretches back more than 2,000 years, and their descendants still live today across a vast arc of the world, from the shores of Arabia to the highlands of Caucasia. This is a region full of old African communities that lived through many generations in Asia, forming unique and untold histories, cultures, and even phenotypes. But to understand where it begins, we have to return to the ancient world. Commercial and political networks once linked the Horn of Africa, the Swahili coast, Nubia, and the Nile Valley to Arabia, Persia, and India. African merchants sailed the Indian Ocean. African soldiers, laborers, and traders move along caravan routes that stitch continents together. Others traveled freely in search of trade, religious reasons, and economic opportunities, but others were sadly forced, caught in systems of slavery that existed in West Asia since the Bronze Age. Unlike the racialized chattel slavery that later developed in the Atlantic world, slavery in these regions were not based on race, as all races were fair game. But over time, especially from the early Islamic period onwards, the demand for labor and military services intensified the movements of African populations into Arabia, Persia, and beyond. Over centuries, Africans settled. They intermarried, they converted to new religions, they adapted to new languages, and they formed enduring communities across the Middle East and Asia, becoming permanent population woven into local societies, with roots stretching back to the African motherland, shaped by the same forces that built the interconnected world of the Indian Ocean. In this video, I'm just introducing you to the African diaspora of the East Indies, but in my book, World Encyclopedia of African People, I go much deeper, not only into the Eastern diaspora, but also the Western diaspora and many African ethnic groups, plus the mixed Afro-derived communities across the continent. In each chapter, I explore their genetic and ancestral backgrounds, their histories and migration, their geographic distribution, their phenotypic traits, their languages and communication, their traditional lifestyles and economies, cultural traits and customs, and modern identity and diasporic communities around the world. It is an eye-opening journey through African global history and one of the most comprehensive ways to understand the full diversity of African people, a subject that is still rarely explored in popular academia. The book is available on Amazon, and it's the best way to support this channel and dive deeper into African anthropology. The link and more details are in description. Now, let's begin. Let's understand the ethnic makeup of these Afro-diasporan communities. Africa is a continent full of diversity. However, unlike North America and the Caribbean, where most of the diaspora comes from West African Niger-Congo ethno-linguistic lineage, or Brazil, where most Africans come from Angolan Bantu groups, the Afro-diaspora in the Orient is largely a mesticized or mixed population. It consists of Nilo-Saharan, Niger-Congo, and Cushitic lineages blending together, with the dominant one being East African Bantu, a subgroup of the Niger-Congo ethno-linguistic family. But here's another contrast and a dark chapter. Many of the men who were brought to the Near East and South Asia through slavery were unable to procreate. This was because males were often castrated, and castrated male slaves were considered more expensive and treated as luxury goods. However, Islamic law allowed intercourse and procreation with female slaves, with children inheriting the status of the father. This is the major reason why most Afro communities in the East Indies became either mixed or absorbed into the local gene pool. But some Afro communities did survive, although small in numbers in comparison to the Afro-diasporan communities from the West Indies. They also became heavily mixed with local populations, as local Arabs, Desis, Turks, and Persians were generally less rigid about racial purity than Northern Europeans, which led to the emergence of mixed, though not fully stabilized phenotypes found among many Afro communities of the East Indies. Let's start with Oman, an Arab country historically ruled by half-black sultans, where most Afro-Omanis trace their ancestry to East African peoples brought through the Indian Ocean slave trade, as well as Omani African mixed families from the Swahili coast who arrived in large numbers escaping the 1964 Zanzibar genocide. However, this community is divided by lineage. Those with Omani Arab paternal lineage claim an Arab identity even if they do not look Semitic due to their high African maternal ancestry, while those descended from only slaves identify strongly with Afro-Omani identity. But both groups preserve cultural memory connecting them to Zanzibar and the broader Swahili coast, even though their language, religion, and social life became fully Omani over time. Today, they live predominantly in coastal cities like Muscat, Sur, and the city of Salalah, fully integrated as Omani citizens, speaking Arabic and practicing Ibadi Islam. Yet many also speak Swahili and maintain cultural practices such as traditional healing rituals of Zanzibari origin and music and dance styles like liwa and fan at tambura, which echoes their African roots. This group has an African phenotype unique to Oman, which I call it the Afro-Omanid phenotype. It is a blend of a dominant North Bantuid base, layered with Arabid influences in places like Muscat and Sur, and Arabian Veddoid in places like the Dhofar region. But this depends on family history, especially those who claim Arab paternal ancestry usually have higher local input than those who don't. Moving north to Saudi Arabia, we have the Afro-Saudi community, which formed through similar processes, particularly in the Hijaz region, where pilgrimage, trade, and slavery intersected. Most are descendants from Muslim pilgrims from West Africa who traveled to Makkah and Medina for Hajj and chose to settle permanently, while others trace their ancestry to the centuries-old Arab slave trade. Today, they form the largest Afro-Arab group in the Middle East, concentrated in cities like Makkah, Jeddah, and Riyadh, and their last family names tell the story. Falata connects to the Fulani people, Hausawi to the Hausa, and Bernawi to the Borno people around Lake Chad. But in Saudi, they are collectively known as the cronies. In contrast to Oman, most local Arabs in Saudi practice strict endogamy. This makes them not as genetically mixed. Plus, most of them came as free men, giving rise to phenotypes which connect to last names. For example, Falata are usually West Ethiopiid, Bernawi are usually Saharan Ethiopiid, and Hausawi are usually Sudanid, with some having small amount of Arabid influences. Outside the West, this is one of the most successful black minority groups, producing scholars, athletes, billionaires, and even members of the royal family. But the story grows more complex when we go south to Yemen. Here, Afro-Yemeni communities emerged in layered forms. The Al-Muhammashin, sometimes called Al-Akhdam, number between 500,000 and 3.5 million. Their origins remain uncertain, but are often linked to Ethiopian soldiers from the pre-Islamic Aksumite occupation or descendants of slaves, and they face severe social discrimination and segregation, relegated to menial jobs and isolated slums. But the division of Yemen into northern and southern states before unification shaped this community differently. The north, ruled by a conservative Shiite imamate, had an un-Islamic traditional caste system. The South, briefly governed by a Marxist state that officially opposed caste discrimination, in which today Southern Afro-Yemenis are more tolerated and are integrated into broader Southern Yemeni societies, even becoming a dominant demographic in some towns and villages since local Yemeni Arabs fled the war. Phenotypically, they are a blend of Nilotic, Northern Bantuid, Central Ethiopiid, and Yemenid. This phenotype I would like to call Afro-Yemenid. Across the Gulf, Afro-Khaliji population formed in Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE. Though linguistically and culturally Arab, these communities preserve musical traditions, ritual practices, and social memories that point towards African origin. In Kuwait, Afro-Kuwaitis descended from slaves from East Africa and the Swahili coast, known for preserving pearl diving rhythms and traditional liwa music. In Bahrain, Afro-Bahrainis trace their ancestries to East Africa and traditionally lived in Muharraq and Rifah, contributing to liwa and the Fidjeri pearl diver songs. In Qatar, Afro-Qataris descend primarily from African slaves who migrated from Zanzibar via Oman and are recognized as one of the three primary population groups in genetic studies on Qatari citizens. In the UAE, Afro-Emiratis include descendants of Zanzibari slaves, both via the Indian Ocean slave trade, and Zanzibari returnees who arrived after the 1964 genocide. Some Emirati tribes like the Al-Hamadi, Al-Darmaki, and Al-Mazrui are said to be of partial African origin, and some families still retain Swahili alongside Arabic. Phenotypically, they show a dominant North Bantuid base with varying degrees of Arabid admixture depending on the family, a phenotype I would like to call Afro-Arabid. In Iraq, Afro-Iraqi communities tell one of the oldest and most dramatic stories among these diaspora peoples. Associated with historical Zanj, they traces their ancestry to East African slaves who settled along the Shat al-Arab, and their history includes rebellion, repression, and survival. Starting in the 9th century, the Abbasid Caliphate brought hundreds and thousands of East Africans to southern Iraq to clear salt flats and work on sugarcane plantations. This community's history includes one of the most significant slave revolts in history, the Zanj Rebellion of 869 to 883 CE. For 15 years, escaped enslaved people and free soldiers rose up against the Abbasid Caliphate, forming their own state, building a capital city called Al-Mukhtara, and even minting their own coins, though the Abbasid army eventually crushed the rebellion. But this remains a powerful symbol of resistance and a cornerstone of Afro-Iraqi collective memory. Today, Afro-Iraqi numbers between 500,000 and 2 million, concentrated in southern Iraq, especially in Basra and the surrounding governorates. They speak Arabic and are predominantly Shia Muslim. They also maintain unique cultural traditions such as ritual music and dance ceremonies with roots in East Africa. And they form a unique phenotype, which has a dominant North Bantuid base, layered with Arabid influences at varying degrees depending on the family. Their phenotypic name is called Afro-Arabid. The Levant also hosts lesser-known Afro-descended populations, which is small in comparison to Afro-Iraqis, but besides Afro-Jordanians, who number around 60,000 and are mostly found in Ghor al-Mazra, are the only community in the Levant that are of slave descent, with the majority of slave descent Afro-Levantines absorbed into the local bloodlines, which makes most Afro-Levantine Arabs having between 5 to 15% African ancestry. This makes the majority of Afro-Levantines descendants of free African migrants. In Palestine, waves of African pilgrims who settled in Jerusalem's African quarters, known today as Little Harlem, came mostly from Chad, northern Nigeria, Sudan, and Senegal, with some communities found in Gaza and the broader occupied territories of the West Bank, suffering double oppression from the Zionists for being visibly black and Palestinian at the same time. They also suffer the same fate and history of ethnic cleansing, occupation, and resistance shared with their Palestinian brethren. This population has Afro-infused Levantine culture, such as the unique dabke moves, danced by Afro-Levantines. They also have songs and custom, blending African and Levantine tradition. This population has a unique phenotype I would like to call Afro-Levantid. It is a mixture of Sudanid, Middle Nile, West Ethiopid, and Senegalid, with varying degrees of Levantine or East Mediterranean and Arabid influences depending on families. Moving east to the Arabian Gulf, we have the Afro-Iranian community. This diaspora developed along the Arabian Gulf coast, particularly in Hormozgan, descended from African sailors, soldiers, and enslaved peoples brought through the Indian Ocean routes. Estimates suggest they constitute between 10 and 15% of the population in southern Iran, concentrated in the coastal provinces of Hormozgan, Bushehr, Sistan, Baluchistan, and Khuzestan, particularly in port cities like Bandar Abbas. During the Qajar dynasty, wealthy households commonly had enslaved black African women and children as domestic servants, while enslaved men worked as laborers on date farms, as pearl divers, and soldiers in elite forces. Slavery was formally abolished in Iran in 1929. Today, Afro-Iranians speak Persian as their primary language and are almost entirely Muslim, with the majority being Shia. Their most visible cultural influence is Bandari music, which is a fusion of Persian melodies with powerful African rhythms, which is a cornerstone of cultural life in southern Iran. The Zar, a belief in spirit possession, and the practice of elaborate exorcism ceremonies involving music, dance, and trance was introduced to Iran from East Africa in the 19th century and is still practiced today. This population has produced a unique phenotype I would like to call Afro-Irani, which has a dominant North Bantuid base with varying Iranian influences depending on families. In Anatolia, we have the Afro-Turks, which formed through Ottoman-era slavery and settled particularly in western Turkey. Their ancestors were brought to the Ottoman Empire from Africa, from the centuries-old slave trade from East Africa, Sudan, Kenya, and elsewhere, with some also arriving as free soldiers or agricultural workers, and others came from Crete during the 1923 population exchange between Greece and Turkey. Today, they number between 5 and 20,000, concentrated in Turkey's Aegean region, particularly in and around Izmir, Aydin, and Mughla. They are fully integrated Turkish citizens who speak Turkish as their first language, are predominantly Sunni Muslim, and identify strongly with Turkish culture. Their most distinctive cultural tradition is the spring festival of Dana Baryami, the Calf Festival, which features music, drumming, and dancing in colorful dress. Community's leaders emphasizes the Afro-Turks are one language, one country, and one culture. This was first the Ottoman Empire, then the Republic of Turkey. They also say that we fought in their wars, including the National War of Independence, yet they often struggle with visibility and recognition, frequently mistaken for tourists or foreign migrants in their own country. The late writer and activist Mustafa Olpak founded the African Culture and Solidarity Association in 2006, bringing the first national attention to Afro-Turk history. And one of the most celebrated Afro-Turk is Ahmet Ali Selikten, an Ottoman combat pilot during World War I, recognized as one of the first black aviators. This population also produced a unique blended phenotype, balanced between Bantuid and Nilotic, with varying degrees of influence from Anatolid and Pontid depending on families, a phenotype I would like to call Afro-Anatolic. Along the coast of the Black Sea, a small and remarkable community once emerged through Ottoman trade routes that linked the Caucasus to Africa. Known as the Afro-Abkhazians, they were a tiny group of people with African ancestry living in the region of Abkhazia. Most historians believe their story began in the 17th or 18th centuries, when a small number of enslaved Africans, likely from East Africa, were brought to the area by Ottoman traders and purchased by local Abkhaz princes to work on citrus plantations. Over time, something unusual happened. Instead of remaining a separate community, they completely assimilated. By the 19th century, Afro-Abkhazians spoke only the Abkhaz language and identified fully as Abkhazian. In daily life, they practiced the same religion as their neighbors, including Orthodox Christianity and Sunni Islam. There is no record of them preserving a distinct African language or separate public cultural traditions. Their traditional villages along the Kondari River were largely destroyed during the 1992 and 1993 war between Georgia and Abkhazia, dispersing many families. However, today this group is heavily mixed with local Abkhazian ancestry, and the African phenotype is now semi-extinct, as it has been heavily diluted, making them a historic group with very low numbers. a big contrast to South Asia. South Asia became another major node of Afro-diasporic settlement, with communities stretching from Balochistan to Sri Lanka bearing witness to centuries of migration through the Indian Ocean slave trade. In Pakistan, the Shidis, concentrated in Sindh and Balochistan and numbering between 250 and over a million, speak Sindhi and Balochi as mother tongues, practice Sunni Islam with deep Sufi devotion, and celebrate their heritage through festivals like the annual Shidi Mila at Karachi's Pir Mango Shrine, where music and dancing retain clear Afro-derived traditions. Many proudly call themselves Kambrani in reference to Kambar, the freed slave of Khalif Ali, and the community has produced celebrated figures like the General Hoshu Shidi, and while in 2018, Tanzila Kambrani became the first Shidi woman elected to Sindh's Provincial Assembly. Across the border to India, the Shidis trace their ancestry to East African slaves, soldiers, sailors, and traders who arrived as early as 628 AD, and millions more Bantu peoples brought through Arab, Persian, and Portuguese slave networks. Despite their origins, some rose to extraordinary prominence, such as Malik Ambar, who became a powerful Deccan ruler. A Sidi nobleman built the intricately latticed Sidi Sayed Mosque in Ahmedabad, and others established principalities like Janjira. Today, they number between 25,000 and 70,000 in Karnataka, Gujarat, Hyderabad, and Maharashtra. They speak local languages and practice Islam, Hinduism, and Christianity while preserving African tradition in their Goma dance, named from the Swahili word Ngoma. Further south in Sri Lanka, the Afro-Lankans, descendants of Bantu people from Mozambique, brought by Portuguese, Dutch, and British colonialists as soldiers, slaves, laborers, and musicians, now live in small coastal pockets from Tinkomale to Negombo, with one of the last concentrated communities in Sirambiandia near Putalam. Though fully integrated and numbering between 1 and 10,000, they maintain a distinctive Creole culture through their Portuguese Sinhala Tamil Creole language, Roman Catholic faith alongside Buddhist and Muslim practices, and music and dance retaining clear African rhythms. All these Afro-Desi communities face challenges of marginalization, poverty, and language loss in case of Afro-Lankans' younger generation shift to Sinhala and Tamil. However, across all three nations, these Afro-diasporic communities have produced unique Afro-Desi phenotypes. In northwest India and Sindh, the Shidis have a phenotype I would like to call Afro-Indied, which is a blend of a dominant North Bantuid base with admixture from Indied phenotypes at varying degrees depending on families. In Balochistan, we have the Afro-Balochid, a similar phenotype with a dominant North Bantuid base and Indo-Iranian influences at varying degrees depending on families. In the south, there is the Afro-Melanid phenotype. It has a dominant central Bantuid base with varying degrees of Indo-Melanid or Sinhalicid depending on families. So guys, there you have it. If you're curious to learn more, check out my previous video on African lineages. And if you want to dive deeper, check out my book which is available on Amazon. And as always, stay curious, stay smart, and thank you very much for watching.